Jim Graham here for Beyond the Cage, streaming live initially on MMA Warriors on Facebook, and of course watching right here on YouTube as well for everybody else that catches it after the fact, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. I am Jim Graham. You can check me out on Twitter at Jim Graham and Lake Beyond the Cage on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. On today's show, I'm going to talk a lot of UFC, starting first with UFC 212. Then I'm going to recap UFC Fight Night Auckland, better known as UFC Fight Night 110. And then I'm going to preview UFC Fight Night 111 or UFC Singapore coming up this weekend exclusively on the UFC Fight Pass. Looking at UFC 212, going back to that pay-per-view that was June 3rd, down in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. 5 fights were shown on the pay-per-view main card. Before I get to those fights, though, I want to talk about some of the undercard fights. Big win for Luan Chagas as he was able to submit Judo Jim Wallhead in the second round. Really, overall, Chagas really dominated the fight against a very experienced competitor in Judo Jim Wallhead. Again, submitting him in the second round. Also, a very nice, overall, it was a great fight, but a very nice win for Devison Figueroa, if I said that correctly, as he knocked out Marco Beltran in the second round. That was a flyweight matchup. Also, one of the biggest upsets of the year, most people won't know about it, but Brian Keller, who was making his UFC debut against top 15 ranked bantamweight Early Alcantara, submitted the Brazilian in the first round, netting him a performance of the night bonus, and huge upset for Mr. Keller, and definitely a guy myself and a lot of fans will now be paying attention to run his record to 17-7. Even though this was his first fight in the UFC, like I said, been around the block. This was his 24th professional fight, if I did my math correctly there. And his birthday will be coming up in August, on August 19th, 1986. So I mean, he's 30 years old, so he's not a super young guy, but finally getting a chance to showcase his skills on a big stage. And obviously was not shown any favors given the fact that he had to face Uri Alcantara, but was able to win. So very impressive win for Brian Keller in his UFC debut. Also, Antonio Carlos Jr. Takes on Eric Spicely. The Brazilian was able to beat the former Ultimate Fighter Ultimate Fighter American contestant, because Antonio Carlos Jr. was on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, submitting him in the second round. That was in the middleweight division. And what was the featured prelim fight, and as fans of MMA Warriors here on Facebook and of course the show Beyond the Cage may know, I actually interviewed Marlon Reyes before the fight against Rafael Assunção there for UFC 212, and it did not go Marlon's way. Assunção ended up getting out the split decision, and really I was not impressed by either guy that much. I really thought both guys kind of left me wanting a little more. Looking at the final numbers, Marlon Reyes just outstruck Assunção 44-43, 150 thrown strikes, just 134 for Assunção. Both tried a few takedowns, not really much. Assunção was 0 for 1, Moraes 0 for 2 in that category. And none of these rounds were really super exciting. The most landed strikes and coincidentally the most thrown strikes, total was in the third round, where both guys maybe were sensing this was a close fight and needed to turn it up a little bit. But I really didn't see a lot from either guy in this fight. Moraes obviously has dominated really every fight up until this one, as far as going back to his World Series of Fighting tenure. And this fight could be a little bit octagon jiggers. He did get tagged a few times with that right hand there of Assunção, but I don't think Marlon was really ever in serious danger of getting finished in this fight. And for Assunção, even though he landed a few of those, wasn't really following it up with much anything. Like I said, only tried for one takedown. You'd think he maybe would have tried more. And for Moraes, didn't throw those signature leg kicks a lot. Maybe he was worried about the takedown, but that's a huge weapon of his that he didn't really use. And when it came to striking, not a super amount of output, and I think neither guy was really setting up their things well. A lot of try to countering and feints, and I don't know, it made for a rather lackluster fight, a fight of two top 10 bantamweights in the world, even though Marlon Moraes is obviously not ranked according to the UFC rankings, this being his debut. But Assunção does get the victory. I think despite beating Marlon and Aljamain Sterling back-to-back, I still think he's probably one fight away until a title shot because neither performances were that convincing, barely beating Sterling and barely beating Marlon Moraes. I think with the TJ and Cody fight getting delayed, we may see somebody like Dominic Cruz get Rafael Asunciao next. And realistically, as far as the rankings go, I think that makes the most sense. Dominic wins. Obviously, he's right back in title contention, whether it's TJ or Cody. And the fact that Dominic hasn't fought since losing to Cody in December, and obviously Cody was supposed to fight TJ here in a few weeks. Obviously, that's going to get delayed. We may see that fight here in August and September. That's going to happen. I still think that's the fight they're going to book, despite all this controversy with TJ Dillashaw and Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, with TJ moving down to 125 to fight for the flyweight title. I think that opens up the possibility of setting up a number one contender for the bantamweight division, and I think Rafael Asunciao, who's ranked number 3, I don't think really moves up because I don't think you put him ahead of Dillashaw or Cruz, who are sitting 1 and 2 respectively. With obviously Cody being the champion, I think it just makes the most sense for Asunciao to take on Dominic Cruz at some point here in the next few months. That sets up a number one contender perfectly. Possibly ends up being on the same card as Cody versus TJ, but we shall see. Getting to the main card there of UFC 212, kicked off in the welterweight division between Yancy Medeiros and Eric Silva. Very excellent fight. Went pretty much how I thought it would be. Both guys showing off some fantastic striking skills. I think it was really a matter of who could kind of get to the other first, and ended up being Yancy Medeiros. He was able to land a very nice counter left hook to Eric Silva that sent the Brazilian crashing to the canvas. A few more strikes landed up on the ground, and the referee, Eduardo Hurdy, ended up stopping this one. And I think the stoppage was premature. Silva looked to be getting a body lock, which was going to make the shots from Medeiros from the top a lot harder because he would have had to kind of go to the side of the head and have a weird motion, and was starting to look like a guy that was fighting out of that position. Now, had Hurdy stopped the fight initially after the drop, maybe you could make a case like, he kind of looked out of it a little bit. That would have been, I think, more definitive, or I think people would have agreed with more. But the fact he let a few more punches go, none of them were super solid, and it looked like Silva was fighting back for his position. He was moving, starting to, again, what is in the rules, intelligently defend himself. I think that was a poor stoppage. Regardless, though, not Medeiros' fault. He gets the victory. I think looked really good. This is a huge win for him. Eric Silva obviously is a big measuring stick. If you can get past Eric Silva, you're definitely ready to take on some top competition. And Medeiros, again, a guy that used to fight at 155, not cutting that extra 15 pounds just makes him a lot more fluid. I think he's a lot faster at this weight class, and I think because of that, his power is there because he's not diminishing himself. And again, this was a guy that was 5'10", so he was a pretty big lightweight. Now, not an overly big welterweight, but actually he's kind of right in the mix. There's not too many guys I would say that are so much bigger than Yancy Medeiros, and obviously we've seen the success that some other guys have had moving up, like Donald Cerrone and Jorge Masvidal, moving up from 155 pounds. So he's just one of the newer guys to do this, and obviously he had a lot to fight for with him and his fellow statesman from Hawaii, Max Holloway, fighting in the main event, so I'm sure that gave him a lot of pride as well, seeing a fellow Hawaiian get that opportunity to fight for the title. So, big win for Yancy. For Eric Silva, it's kind of what he does. Anyone that's slightly decent or, not bad, he loses to. And Eric Silva's an exciting guy. The UFC may keep him around for that fact, but at this stage in his career, he's not getting to the top anymore, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's a guy the UFC lets go, even though he is exciting and he is still a relatively known guy in Brazil. He just keeps on losing to people decent. I'm just sure he's a guy that can keep on throwing out there as a respectable contender, and people are going to buy into anymore. The next fight of the evening, that was at 185 pounds as Paulo Borchiano took on Awole Bambos. And again, another fight, as I said here on this very show, something violent was going to happen, but I thought the Brazilian Paulo would be the one that would outlast the Holy War Angel, and I was correct. Now, a lot of people question his conditioning. Would it hold up against someone better? I don't know. It's hard to say because it held up against the guy he was taking on. Was the guy he taken on the best quality of opponent? No, but he got the job done. I mean, he threw 88 strikes in a fight that went about 8 minutes, and he looked pretty well conditioned in that. Take that for what it's will. I mean, he landed 50 strikes. He definitely was putting a lot out there. Did get taken down twice, but was able to get back up quickly and really just kept on landing bombs. The big turning point, I believe, was a body kick that Paul landed to the Holy War Angel towards the middle, a little bit towards the end of the first round. And really from that point was kind of the beginning of the end for Bamboos. And Borchian just kept on coming. You saw him dig into the body, dig into the head, and eventually was able to land a great combination there to get the finish at 106 in the second round, as Big John McCarthy had to come in and stop this one. And again, we'll see if this kid is truly elite. I'm not, really sure what to make of him yet. He has a lot of power. He's a big, strong guy. Again, he looks like a guy that, probably would have trouble lasting a full 15 minutes or obviously 25 if he ever gets a chance to fight that long. But, hey, he's fun and exciting. The fans in Brazil love him, so a guy I would love to see him match up against, and I believe he does have a fight booked already, but I think Sam Alvey would be a very good fight against him as well, and I even think a Uriah Hall fight would be fun as well. So we'll see what's next for Mr. Borchina, if I said that correctly, but definitely a guy that does have some promise, and at the very least is a very exciting guy to watch. Next fight of the evening for UFC 212 was a matchup in the middleweight division as former light heavyweight champion Vitor Belfort took on former middleweight title challenger and Strikeforce welterweight title holder Nate the Great Marquardt, as well as a former king of Pancrase. Ended up going towards Vitor Belfort, which I'm not too surprised, but when you actually look at the stats, it really shows a fight that looked like Marquardt got the better of the Brazilian as he took down the Brazilian once. That was in the first round, and that's really where the big striking disparity numbers come from, as he outstruck Vitor 21-3 in that frame, and that round was definitely all for the American Nate Marquardt. Rounds 2 and 3 were pretty close. I think 2 could have went either way, as Marquardt did outstrike Vitor 26-16, but again, Vitor was landing the more fight-ending shots, and I think that kind of swayed the judges. Round 3, you saw Vitor turn it up a little bit. Nate Marquardt still slightly outstruck the Brazilian 21-19, but I think Vitor probably took that round. It was really how you scored round 2, and I thought Nate Marquardt did enough to get the victory, but I had a feeling close. It's in Brazil. Vitor Belfort almost never loses in Brazil. I believe that fight against Kelvin Gastelum, his last fight, was the first fight ever he had lost in Brazil. So if it did go to the judges' scorecards, which again Vitor Belfort has not done in 10 years, which is insane that he's gone that long without going to a decision, whether it's obviously win or lose, but it's a fight whether he knocked the guy out or he got knocked out. It's just crazy that in 10 years he had not been to a decision. And I just thought in what could be his last fight, that may kind of give him the nod. And what, again, was a close fight. I'm not saying Vitor didn't deserve it, but it's definitely a fight that I probably would have scored in favor of Marquardt if you really tried to go there. And I try to be objective because, again, I'm a huge Vitor Belfort fan. I picked Vitor to win this fight. So, of course, I was rooting for him to get the nod. But after the fight, I was, And he did get the win. Obviously, this was his first training camp with TriStar up in Montreal. Of course, the home to former home of Rory McDonald, but obviously with George St. Pierre and many other fighters have gone over there through the years. But you could tell this was a little different Vitor, and a Vitor that was a little more reserved, a guy that was looking for combinations, was looking for the right opportunity instead of just trying to blitz somebody. And because of that training and style that Fariz is going to bring Vitor, he can last a few more fights than if he was just going in trying to blitz some guys in the first round, because that's what gets you caught, that's what gets you hurt, and obviously being older, those are fights that can, hurt you, literally, and kind of affect you, especially when you're already over 40 years old. So with this style, I can actually see Vitor, as he was saying, fight 5 more times, because it's a style that's going to reduce the damage a little bit and get him out of the firefights that we're used to seeing Vitor. Now, that doesn't mean I think Vitor is going to be boring now. It's just that he's going to be more selective in his shots, because I think despite his age, he still has pretty decent hand speed, and obviously the power, I think, is still there. It's just a matter of him putting those combinations together, and I don't think he's going to be better than what he was, but I still think we can see a solid fighter. Now, is that a fighter that would compete for a UFC championship? Absolutely not. I'm not going to make that claim here. I'm not going to go that bold. But it's a guy that I think can be competitive in fights, and a guy that won't look like a shell of his former self. Now, whether that's in Bellator, whether that's in Risen, or whether that's in who knows where it will be, I'm going to be watching. And I think it will be interesting to see him have a few more fights, because it still looks like a guy that has a little bit left in the tank. After the Gastelum fight, I was all ready to write off Vitor Belfort, and I think most were ready to write off Vitor Belfort as well. But seeing this type of performance with the coaching that Fariz gave him, I think we could see Vitor Belfort a couple more times, and I think go out the right way, and maybe go out with a big knockout finish. And if this was his last fight, which, again, it doesn't look like it will be, but if it was, at least he went out in his home country, he went out with a win, and he went out against a solid competitor. So if it was the last of Vitor, it was a decent ending, but it looks like we'll get more Vitor somewhere later here in 2017, and again, I will be watching. The next fight of the evening for UFC 212 co-main event, that was in the women's strawweight division, Claudia Gadelha against Karolina Kowalkiewicz, and this was the only fight I got wrong on the main card. Got all the other fights correct, but of all the fights I could have got wrong, I did not expect. I guess I didn't expect this one to happen, but I guess the way it happened, I should say, I did not expect Claudia to go out there and just make it look so easily against Karolina, and maybe I just doubted how good Claudia was, because her last fight, she beat Courtney Casey, who is a solid competitor, but again, not anyone that was in the top 10, and again, not Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So maybe I gave, maybe I underestimated a little bit of Claudia because of her last couple of opponents. But she went in there, got the takedown, got the back quickly, and got the submission. I mean, she made it look super easy. If you wouldn't have known this was a 1 versus 2 matchup, you would think that Karolina, was a lot lower ranked. That's how good Claudia looked. She made Karolina look like a sub-15 opponent. And it was really simple. It wasn't something crazy that Claudia did. She didn't do some crazy jiu-jitsu move that no one's ever seen before, that she's been practicing for 15 years or something like that. But she got the job done. And I think for Karolina, I think a lot of people, and myself included, thought her takedown defense was really solid and would be hard for Claudia to take her down and would stay in the clinch. And Karolina has shown to be a great clinch striker with her Muay Thai background and possibly win that way. That's how I thought this fight was going to go. But that's not how it happened. She got taken down and got the submission quickly. She took that out of the equation, and huge win for Claudia. She puts herself in a precarious position because she's already lost to the champion, Joanna, twice, and I don't know how eager or soon the UFC wants to make a third fight. So that puts her fighting somebody, possibly Rose Namajunas, unless Rose gets Joanna Jędrzejczyk, or she maybe waits for Rose to take on Joanna. Maybe she fights Jessica Andrade. I think that's a very likely opponent as well. Or maybe she goes up to 125. There are rumors about a 125 women's division. There's supposed to be an Ultimate Fighter. I don't know. I hear reports back and forth. I think it's official as of right now, as I'm speaking here for this show. And if that's true, I think that's a very likely option for Claudia to go to. And obviously, I think they've already picked a cast or pretty close to picking a cast for the 125 women's division for the Ultimate Fighter. So I don't think Claudia would factor in there, but she could factor in as a possible first title challenger or maybe a second fight to determine a number one contender against somebody. She could factor in that way. She kind of left who she wanted next uncertain after the fight in the post-fight interview. So could go a few different ways there, but again, she had an incredible performance, though, against Carolina. All right, enough about gushing about Claudia and what she might do next. And for Carolina, obviously, she's going to have to work on her ground skills if she wants to get back up towards the top in this division. But getting to the main event of the evening for the undisputed featherweight championship of the UFC, Max Holloway against Jose Aldo. And this fight went kind of how I thought it would be. The only thing I didn't expect was Max to kind of hold back in that first round. I think that was a little bit of a rope-a-dope strategy there, kind of letting Aldo come forward, maybe thinking, Max is either scared of him or maybe not as good as he is, and also gauging what Aldo was going to bring to the table. And after seeing that first round, whether that was intentional or not, if it was intentional, I think it was a great move by Max, and either by him or his coaching staff. I don't know who came up with that, but I think that was a brilliant move. And you saw him get that timing down. You saw him see what Aldo has to offer and come out and change completely in the second round and really start to use that range, use that speed, use that long frame of his, and use those combinations and punches and bunches. And he has such a great style, a style I really like and really think is a great way to fight. In and out, a lot of combinations, not throwing anything super hard, just landing accurate strikes, and that's what he was doing. He was wearing Aldo out. He was just beating him up, and the second round kept on coming with the onslaught, then probably mixed in a few harder shots, up the percentage on those strikes, and Aldo couldn't handle it anymore, and he got the knockout finish there. And afterwards, you hear his coach and Aldo saying, he would have liked to use more leg kicks, and I think that was a huge mistake by Jose Aldo. Max Holloway is not a guy that typically likes to take the fight to the ground. That's not really his MO, so I'm not really sure why Aldo would be scared to throw leg kicks, thinking that Holloway would take him down. That's not a guy that I would say really would do that. So in that instance, why wouldn't he throw the leg kicks? And being a little bit shorter and obviously not having the big reach, leg kicks are a great equalizer in that equation. So for Aldo to not throw those, I think was a huge error in strategy. Now, if he throws a whole bunch of leg kicks, can Max Holloway not win? Yeah, it's a possibility. However, the same thing may have happened. I don't know, but you got to do what you're good at. Sometimes you got to take the path of least resistance is what I like to say a lot on this program, and Jose Aldo did not do that. That could have been something very simple to change the factor, to change maybe not getting knocked out in the third round. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, but I would have liked to have seen him employ that strategy. And is Aldo completely done? I don't know. I just knew that this fight was Max Holloway's time. He caught Aldo at the right time, having lost to Conor McGregor not that long ago, losing that chance of ever getting Conor McGregor back in a fight. And despite it being in his hometown, I just didn't think Aldo was really up for Max Holloway. Now, maybe this is a loss that really motivates Jose Aldo, and maybe this allows him to forget Conor McGregor and just focus on what he can control, which is the fights that he can get, and not worry about Conor McGregor so much. So maybe we'll see a reinvigorated Jose Aldo, and maybe we'll see a guy that could beat Max Holloway and become a third-time featherweight champion. Or we see a guy that just wallows in this loss and wallows in the Conor's loss and just never gets his head back in the game and is just a shell of his former self. Again, this is a guy that has been fighting professionally for over 10 years now. So a guy that really doesn't have much left to prove. I mean, he doesn't need to become a third-time featherweight champion. He probably is a UFC Hall of Famer already and arguably is the greatest 145 fighter of all time up until this point. So it's hard to say that he has to go back out there and do anything because he doesn't have to. He could retire today, and I couldn't blame the guy. It's just a matter of what he wants to do with his life because he's definitely at a crossroads. And if this is like I said, it's either going to motivate him to get better and we're going to see a great fighter emerge once again, or it's just going to completely bury him, and it's a guy that's never going to get over the mental hurdles that he's, again, put on himself. And for Max Holloway, just real quickly, again, a great performance, very deserving, becoming the undisputed champion. And I think Frankie Edgar is what's next for him. I think that's the fight to make. No offense to Cub Swanson, but he got dominated by Frankie Edgar. He got dominated by Jose Aldo, and he got dominated by Max Holloway. And beating Artem Lobov is not as impressive as beating Yair Rodriguez, which was Frankie Edgar's last fight. So I would say Cub Swanson's probably going to have to fight somebody more, whether that's Korean Zombie, whether that's Ricardo Lamas, whether that's, I think Chad Mendes is still suspended. I mean, whether that is Yair Rodriguez, even coming off a loss, I think still would be a huge victory. It's got to be somebody. I think another fight has to be in the mix there for Cub Swanson before, in my opinion, I'd like to see him fight for the 145 title. But I think Frankie versus Max later this year would be an incredible matchup, and that would be the fight I would like to see. Getting to UFC Auckland now, this past weekend on Fox Sports 1. Looking at the undercard real quickly, undercard was rather pedestrian. Ended up seeing of the, I believe it was 5 undercard fights, only one finish, and that was courtesy of Vince Pichel, who hadn't fought in the UFC for over 3 years. Ended up knocking out Damian Brown with a incredible counter right, and just dropped Brown, threw a few more in there, and Brown couldn't recover. So very impressive performance by Vince Pichel after the long layoff, a guy that always had a lot of power, and he proved it that he still has it there last Saturday night in New Zealand. Also, on the other card, as far as wins go, J.J. Aldrich won, Zach Otto, John Moraga, Luke Jamo. And yeah, those were the winners there on the undercard. 6 fights on the main card. First fight of the evening, Alexander Volkovsky against Mizuto Hirota. Big win for Volkanovski. Hirota is a very accomplished individual, has a lot of experience under his belt, and while he did slow up a little bit there, especially towards the end of the second round, you saw Volkanovski slow down a little bit. Guy that definitely was putting a tremendous pace out there early on, and a guy that was relentless, early on with the takedowns, as he had 3 takedowns in the first round, outstruck Hirota 35-19, kept on coming in the round 2, outstruck him 35-15, landed another takedown, and then in round 3 again, that's when you really saw that huge pace that Volkanovski was putting out there. Hirota started to kind of get his feet back under a little bit after taking the shots. Did get outstruck 26-17, tried 4 takedowns, but I probably would have gave Hirota the third round. He was the one being more active, pushing the pace in that round, but overall Volkanovski would have gave it 29-28. All judges did score at 30-27. However, he was definitely deserving of the win, and for Volkanovski, it's really going to be maybe just pacing himself a little bit. That's the only flaw I saw in this game. Definitely a guy that hits hard, has some good takedowns, and definitely guys that can control a fight, and definitely a guy that can change things up with that pace. But some of the better guys in this division, the featherweight division, are going to be able to combat that. They're going to be able to match you pace for pace, and if you can't hang with them, you're not going to get to the elite. So that's one only negative I would see in Volkanovski, just up the conditioning just a tad. And this is a guy that could be in the top 10 and fighting top 10 guys very soon. Next fight of the evening, that was in the flyweight division, and talk about upsets. I was talking about that Brian Keller upset over early Colin Tara. Now this one's maybe not quite as big of an upset as far as rankings, because Ben Nguyen is a guy that I believe that was ranked to the top 15 for this fight, or if not, very close to it. So not quite, obviously, Ben Nguyen not making his UFC debut, but catching Tim Elliott in that guillotine choke, or in the rear naked choke, that quickly is incredible. That was just an incredible performance, and Tim Elliott, a guy that coming off a good performance in a loss to Mighty Mouse Johnson, then dominated Louis Smolka in his last fight. Tim Elliott poised to possibly make another run at the title after already getting one shot at Mighty Mouse. a little disappointing, really. And it kind of reminded me of going back to Claudia and Carolina. It's just a very similar thing. It's early, they're dry. Ben Wynn just kind of climbs around. Elliott maybe, again, underestimating Wynn, maybe not taking this seriously being early in the fight, and just gives up his neck and ends up tapping. Just an incredible performance by Ben Wynn. It has to be very disappointing for Tim Elliott, a guy that was definitely had a lot of momentum riding into that fight, and I don't think this completely takes him out of the title picture, but boy, this is definitely a setback. It's one thing to lose, but when you go out like that, it always gives you pause, and I think those are the fights that when fighters look back, those are ones that they get disappointed at their performance. So they're like, man, what did I do wrong? And again, those are fights that either motivate you to really go out there and change what you're doing for your next fight, or those are losses that you just kind of dwell on, and it hampers you from really going to the next level. Now, Tim Elliott does seem like a guy that's mentally strong, a guy again, that got cut from the UFC, goes on the Ultimate Fighter, wins. So I think Tim Elliott will be all right. Other guys maybe not, but huge win for Ben Wynn because he really he looked kind of bad in his fight against Luis Smolka. Going back to that, I believe that was last July, and he had since rebounded and beat Gene Herrera, but again, can anyone tell me who Gene Herrera is? I'll wait in the comments. No one knows who that guy is, so yeah, he beat that guy. That's cool. But to beat an elite guy like that, is incredible. And that shows me that Ben Wynn is over that loss and is a guy that's not intimidated by top guys like Tim Elliott, and a guy that I'm excited to see what's next. Maybe a matchup against Brandon Moreno I think would be very excellent coming up next. But huge win, and obviously a big disappointment there for Tim Elliott, because that was a fight, again, that could have propelled him a big leap forward in what is right now a shallow flyweight division. Getting to the next fight of the evening here for UFC Auckland, Ian Cutelaba against Henry Da Silva. Man, this guy Cutelaba, if you haven't seen Cutelaba fight before this dude is awesome, okay? I hadn't seen this dude fight before his fight against Jared Cannonier, which was his last fight back in December 2016. A fight he lost, but an incredible fight that went 15 minutes, one fight of the night. This dude is like, I don't know, he's scary, he's intimidating, he gets in your face, and he just comes right at you. You know what to expect from him, and it's just a matter of, can you stop it? Excuse me. And in this instance, Da Silva couldn't stop it. Came right at him, full force, landed those power shots, and got out of there in 22 seconds. I mean, maybe I expected Cutelaba to win, maybe not in 22 seconds, but man, incredible performance by him. That runs his record to 2-2. Only losses coming to some solid competitors in Misha Krukhanov, his very first fight. No shame in losing to Krukhanov. And then, of course, again, that Jared Cannonier fight, which was a very close fight, a fight which he could have booked either way. And this is a dude that, with that style, he's going to be fun to watch. I'm not really sure what's next for Cutelaba. I wouldn't say Da Silva was a highly ranked individual, but I mean, he got the job done in 22 seconds, and I believe he is from Serbia, if that's correct. And for this native there of Eastern Europe, he's exciting to watch, and I'm really looking forward to the next Cutelaba fight, hopefully really soon, because the the light heavyweight division is very shallow right now and needs some new blood, and maybe Cutelaba is the guy that ushers in a new era for the light heavyweight division. Next fight of the evening for UFC Auckland, Dan Hooker against Ross Pearson in the lightweight division. Hooker formerly competed at 145. Thought looked a lot better there at 155 as far as his movement. You could tell you could tell with his conditioning, his output looked a lot better there. First round, I thought was close. Hooker was definitely the more active of the two, but Pearson tagged him a couple of times, and I think did hurt him a little bit there. And I think despite Hooker outstriking Pearson 37-20, I think I would have gave the round to Ross because of those power shots that he was able to land on the counter. Because he had to really sit back. He was having trouble with the in-and-out movement and length that Dan Hooker brought to this matchup, and I think that's why you saw Ross sit back a little more on his punches, and I think that's why they were so effective, is because when he did land, that's what he was waiting to do. And then the second round, more of the same. Hooker was kind of doing the same thing, starting to land a little more of his own shots there. Pearson's still kind of sitting back, but then kind of out of nowhere, again, Dan Hooker's not a huge knockout guy. Boom! He timed that knee perfectly. And I don't know if that's something that it was just in the moment he just happened to land and saw, if that was something he's working on, or something in between the first and second round, his corner said, hey, if you see this happen, do this. Regardless, that was a huge knee, and because of his length, that is something he can do in this division, because I believe he's listed at 6'1", if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to double check here. He's 6 foot. Again, used to fight at 45, now 55. That's still a very big lightweight. And this guy is still very young. Just turned, I believe, 27 earlier this year in February. So a guy that's very young. His record is now 15-7. This was his first fight at 155. Had mixed results at 145, going 3-3. His biggest win was when he knocked out Hatsuhioki back in May of 2015. And I think it's going to be a little bit of adjustment, because obviously there's going to be some bigger guys, some stronger guys at 155 moving up to 10 pounds. But I think he showed that he can hang. Ross Pearson is a very solid guy, a very good measuring stick to see where you at in the career and where you could possibly land at in the 155 division. And obviously he held up admirably and got the knockout finish. I'm interested to see him moving forward against some of the better guys. He's more of a submission guy, so I think in that respect it should be fun seeing him match up. The only weakness I think he's going to have is the wrestling, even though he's good at submissions, not necessarily good at takedown defense. And that is something I think if he wants to get to the elite of this division, he's really going to have to work on, because there are some very strong wrestlers in this division, guys who will expose that takedown defense of his. But standing up, if he can work in, move in and out, use that height and reach to his advantage, he could be a scary guy. Maybe bulk up a little bit to add power. I think would also help too if this is going to be his weight class, and he's going to be fun to watch, I think. Again, he put it out there on Saturday, and beating a guy like Ross Pearson is nothing to shake a spoon at or shake a stick at, as they say. Getting to the co-main event of the evening, Derek Brunson against Dan Kelly. Pretty much went how I thought it would be. I know people were really high on Dan Kelly coming off his win over Rashad Evans, but I honestly thought Rashad Evans won that fight, number one. And number two, I didn't think Kelly looked that really good. And three, the last time he took on a guy that was a really big power puncher, a.k.a. Sam Alvey, guess what happened? Dan Kelly got his first loss in the UFC and got knocked out cold. And Derek Brunson is a very big power puncher, and obviously a little younger, a little faster, and Dan Kelly's about 40 years old now. He wears those knee pads. He's not a guy that moves particularly well. He's not a guy that has a lot of hand speed, and I just thought this was a tailor-made fight for Derek Brunson to win. I think it would have been a huge upset had Brunson lost, and that's pretty much how I thought it was going to go. It was just a matter of time before Derek Brunson uncorked one of those shots. I think Brunson could have went out more guns a-blazing in this effort to even finish it quicker, but he was showing a little more reserved, a little more calm Derek Brunson than what we saw against Robert Whittaker the last time he fought Down Under, even though that fight was in Australia, not New Zealand, but fans know what I'm talking about. So he gets the win there. I think that pretty much ends the Dan Kelly bandwagon and hype train, and I'm not saying Dan Kelly should retire, but come on, Dan Kelly wasn't going to get to the level, not at this stage in his career. I mean, a couple years ago, let's say 10 years ago, maybe, but right now it's just, he can't keep up with the guys in this division as far as speed. Yeah, he got past old man Rashad. Rashad's almost as old as him. So, yeah, he got past him, but realistically, against some of these big, strong, younger guys like a Derek Brunson, he can't compete with those guys anymore. Main event of the evening, Mark Hunt against Derek Lewis. Well, first couple rounds kind of went what I thought. You would see Mark Hunt probably taking control of the center of the cage, really trying to stalk the much bigger and taller Derek Lewis. You would see Derek Lewis kind of explode and contract. It was just a matter of kind of whose big punches or strategy would outlast first, and it ended up being Mark Hunt. Derek Lewis just couldn't keep up that pace. You could tell he was just getting tired and more tired as this fight went on, despite him trying to pace himself and, like I said, trying to explode, and rest. But after the fight, he said that he had a back issue. That's why he wasn't moving as so well in rounds 3 and 4. I'm not saying that wasn't a factor, but his conditioning wasn't great. And that's the biggest flaw of Derek Lewis's game, is that he's just a really big dude, and to do these moves, it takes a lot of energy, and he doesn't have a lot of energy to begin with, so, excuse me, it just doesn't last long. And Mark Hunt was sitting back. He was waiting for his moments, even though Mark Hunt's maybe not in the greatest shape or maybe the most conditioned athlete. He knows how to fight his style, and he didn't do anything that took him, that expended a whole lot of energy. You know, he wasn't staying in the clinch. He wasn't trying to take Derek Lewis down. He wasn't trying to out-muscle Derek Lewis. And that strategy was able to give him more energy to keep on lasting, and eventually he was able to land enough strikes in combination with Derek Lewis basically not being able to stand to get this victory. After the fight, Derek Lewis cites this may be his last fight in the UFC or ever in MMA. We'll see. Obviously, he said he's getting married. If it is a serious back injury, maybe with surgery, that's something he can return, or maybe he doesn't want to go through that again. But Derek Lewis, obviously one of the most entertaining and colorful guys that we've ever seen in the UFC. And it would be a shame if this was his career. For Mark Hunt, looks like he'll continue right on. After the fight, I think had he lost that fight, I think he would have retired. I think he would have went out there in his hometown. But it sounded like he wanted to fight a few more. Though, again, he's a guy that I think could call it a career as well. I believe he's the only fighter on the roster that was born in the 70s. He's 43 years old, has nothing left to prove. I mean, he's not going to be fighting for a championship, anytime soon. A guy that, again, is still entertaining. I do like to watch, I'm not going to lie. But a guy that, probably should start thinking about that, the end of his career. I think that would have been a good ending there in his home country, New Zealand, where he hadn't fought in any type of combat sports match in 15 years. I think that would have been a good way to go out, but now we'll maybe see him fight a few more times and maybe get another fight in his home country of New Zealand. I don't know. We'll see, but it looks as though the Super Samoan will continue and possibly the Black Beast will not. Ending the show here with my preview of UFC Singapore. Looks like, I believe it's going to be 11 fights shown. Officially 12 fights that will be shown on the Fight Pass prelims. If you live on the Eastern time zone part of the United States, like myself here in Detroit, those fights are going to start at 4:45 in the morning. That's 1:45 on the left coast. And the main card will start promptly at 8 a.m. Eastern. I'm just going to go over the main card here, but on the undercard, some solid fights coming to us. Lucy Padova had a very good matchup in her last fight. That was against Lena Landsberg. She'll be taking on Jae-Yoon Kim. Also, we're going to see Russell Doan against Kwan Ho Kwak, if I said that correctly. Justin Scoggins against Alka Sasaki. That should be a highly entertaining bout at 125 pounds. Also, Bruce Leroy will take on Ronaldo Dai at 145. We're also going to see Cyril Asker take on Walt Harris, the big ticket, who I'm a huge fan of here in the heavyweight division. Big fan of his. That should be a highly entertaining bout. And Takanori Gomi taking on the Super Saiyan John Tuck. This could be Gomi's last fight. Who knows? It's unfortunate that's on Fight Pass, but I think that deserves a little more of a primetime showing. However, always fun to see Takanori Gomi throw down as he takes on one of the young guys in the division in John Tuck. And super exciting fight there, and I think that's it might end. That's definitely could be my case for my most anticipated bout on the card, because I'm always anticipating, always like to see Takanori Gomi fight. And again, this could be his last fight, so I'm going to be watching that one very anxiously. Getting to the main card, however, it's going to start first in the welterweight division. as Tarek Saffiedine will take on former lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos. Very interesting to see Dos Anjos move up to 170. I don't think this is a great move, to be honest. I don't think he'll translate well to 170. A guy that's only 5'9", wasn't an overly big lightweight. I don't know. I know Saffiedine's listed at the same height, but I don't know. There's some really big dudes at 170, so I don't know if this is a one-off or if he's serious about competing at 170. But Tarek Saffiedine is a very tricky guy to take on, and he's taken on some really big dudes in this division, taking on Dong Hyun Kim and Rick Story in his last 2 fights. And although neither of those fights went his way, they were highly competitive fights and fights that he very much was in the mix for. And against Rafael dos Anjos, his strength is really pushing the pace with the takedowns and controlling the top game. Standing up, he's good. Obviously, in his last fight, he did go toe-to-toe for Tony Ferguson, but I think the longer it stays standing up, I think that's Saffiedine. I think his in-and-out movement, he's so tricky, I think that's going to be hard for Dos Anjos to pick up despite moving up the weight class. And I think when it comes to takedowns, Saffiedine is super tough to take down. And obviously, being a guy that's fought at 170 for pretty much his whole career and taking on a guy that has fought almost his whole career at 155, I think it's going to be tough for Dos Anjos to try to take Saffiedine down. If it's left to standing, maybe more of 60-40 towards Saffiedine, but Saffiedine is a very tough style. He's a guy that very much is a counter striker and is just difficult to hit. And he's really just difficult to take down and hold on to and really get a huge beat on. He's a tough guy to finish as well. And I just think this is a bad matchup for Rafael dos Anjos. I think he could beat some guys at 170. I'm not saying he can beat nobody at 170, but Saffiedine is a guy that's kind of right towards the edge of the top 15, and I don't think Dos Anjos is ready for that, and I don't particularly think this is a great move by him. We'll see, though. Maybe he'll prove me wrong. Maybe he'll go out there and just absolutely hand it to Tarek Saffiedine, but I really think that this is going to be a very difficult fight for him to win. And maybe that's me giving my pick away a little bit here as I get to picks in a few minutes, but I just think that this is going to be a very tough matchup for Dos Anjos to try to outmaneuver somebody like Saffiedine. Dong Hyun Kim against Colby Covington, very much the old guard versus the new guard. Dong Hyun Kim's been fighting in the UFC for a very long time. In fact, his first UFC fight was all the way back in 2008, where he defeated Jason Tan. So he's been fighting in the UFC for 9 years, has fought a who's who, and has beaten some of the best at this division. Has had to offer, including TJ Grant, Nate Diaz, Paulo Thiago, Eric Silva, John Hathaway, and most recently defeated Tarek Saffiedine back at UFC 207, currently riding a 3-fight winning streak. Has looked pretty good as of late. He kind of had that crazy streak there for a while between 2003 and 2015, where he fought crazy against Eric Silva and John Hathaway, and then did lose to Tyron Woodley there in August of 2014. But has since kind of calmed down a little bit, has kind of added in that dramatic, crazy style along with his traditional great judo and top control game. Has worked out well as of late, as I said, has won his last 3 fights. Colby Covington is a guy that, if you follow him on Twitter, is an extremely confident individual, 11-1 overall in his career. Only lost to Warley Alves, who's a very solid competitor that was back at UFC 194. Since then, he has gone on to win 3 straight. His last fight, probably his best win, defeating Brian Barberina back at UFC on Fox 22. And he also does hold a win over Mike Pyle. That was in his second UFC fight, a fight that he actually dominated. And Colby's more known for his grappling, while his striking, I think, has certainly evolved. He's definitely, I think, better with his grappling. 6 submission wins of his 11, only 1 knockout to his credit, also 4 decisions in there. And I don't know. I have a feeling this could be a little bit of a boring fight. I mean, Kim has 11 decisions to his credit of his 22 victories, and has never lost a decision. Has also never been submitted. His only losses are via knockout. And while sure, he is older now at 35 years old, I'm not sure if Covington's, again, he's not a huge knockout guy, so a knockout I don't necessarily see from Covington. I think it's really going to be who can win the clinch battle. You know, who's going to make their opponent's back be up against the cage. And I think that's going to be a really big telling point of this fight. When it stays standing, I think it's a little more 50-50. Obviously, I give a power edge to Dong Hyun Kim, even though the fight's not in Korea. You got to think the fight being in Singapore, time zone and all that. Fans, Kim has maybe a slight advantage there. But I don't know. While as much as I like Colby Covington, I think he definitely is a good prospect for this division. Dong Hyun Kim's a very hard guy to game plan for. He's a very big individual. And again, the guy that is, he's only lost 3 times in his career out of, 27 professional bouts. He's a very tough guy to beat. And I don't know, I see a little bit maybe of a slightly lackluster fight. Not saying the performances are going to be bad, but in terms of entertainment factor, I think this is going to be more grueling, grappling type pace. Maybe I could be wrong, but I think we're going to see that. It's just going to be really who can get out of those situations looking the best, who can get the fight to their advantage and into an advantageous position, again, where their back's not up against the cage. I really think that's how this fight's going to play out. Heavyweight division, Marcin Tybura against Andrei Arlovski. The former UFC heavyweight champion has kind of fallen on tough times as of late after having a really nice return to the organization, which saw kind of a slight resurgence again for the former champion, in which he was able to win 3 fights in a row, and that was actually 4 fights in a row, couple overall with a 6-fight losing streak, go back to when he was with World Series of Fighting. And, he was starting to build up towards the title run there. Got a fight with Stipe Miocic at UFC 195. However, he lost that one, has now lost 4 straight. He's got finished in every single one of those fights and really has not looked good in any of them. He got knocked out in 54 seconds against Stipe. Looked bad against Overeem, looked bad against Barnett, and then looked bad against Francis Ngannou. And I think this has to be Arlovski's last fight. He's 38 years old. He's, I know a lot of people said he was done back in 2009 and 2011 where he lost 4 in a row, and he ended up then going on then he ended up winning 11 out of his, he ended up winning 10 out of his last 12 fights with 1 no contest and 1 loss to Rumble Johnson mixed in there, but this is not the same thing. He's now 38, and again, that streak was like 6 years ago. He was 32. It was somewhat believable that he could come back from that, but now I don't think so. And I think win or lose, this is his last fight, and it's been fun to watch Andrei Arlovski. I've been saying this a lot lately this show. A lot of guys coming towards the end of their career, but a guy that I've enjoyed, but I just don't see it anymore. He just doesn't have it. He can't take the shots like he used to. He doesn't have the conditioning. He was never a supreme grappler, but he was good at getting out of bad situations. And against Tybura, a guy who is a big, strong, young guy, that's going to be something that he's going to have to watch out for. And kind of look into his fight against Josh Barnett, he had a lot of trouble getting out of those situations against Josh Barnett, and you could see the same thing end up happening here against the Polish fighter here in Tybura, who, again, is a big, strong guy, who I think is going to push this fight in the clinch and really try to push Andrei Arlovski, and I think is going to be able to. I think Arlovski, if he can keep the fight at range, I think he has a chance to possibly add another win to his resume. But I don't know. I just nothing in the last couple fights has shown me to be extremely confident in picking Andrei Arlovski to win a fight and picking him to certainly knock out anybody. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we see Andrei Arlovski just being able to go out there guns a-blazing and get a knockout. But I think Tybura is going to be able to do what he wants to do and possibly end the career of Andrei Arlovski in the process. Holly Holm against Betch Kehea for the main event. Holly Holm, after winning and defeating Ronda Rousey and, of course, winning the Women's Bantamweight Championship, has really fell on hard times, losing the title to Miesha Tate, then losing a fight where really she got dominated in Valentina Shevchenko, and then losing losing to Duratimi, but a fight where she didn't look particularly good. I don't think Duratimi looked particularly good. It wasn't a really great fight, and just really overall in the last couple fights, again, the Tate fight, she did look good. Just Tate was able to come back and get the finish, and it was a great fight. But again, that's 3 losses in a row. And really, what's been the difference? She hasn't got the finishes. She hasn't been able to put together enough combinations and enough landing strikes to really do a lot of damage on people. And those end up making for fights that look close and get strung out, and fights where maybe she could have won, but she didn't. And I think she really has to step it up. Really, both fighters do, because I don't think Betch really, since losing to Ronda, I mean, she's gone 1-1-1. She hasn't looked particularly great. I mean, she had a split decision loss. Again, it was a close fight. She barely beat Jessica Ai, and then a fight where she had her moments, but again, because she got super dominated in one round, it ended up being a 10-8, she gets a draw against Marion Renault. And I think this is kind of a weird fight to book as a main event. I don't think neither fighter has been particularly great as of late, and I think both really need to step up the pace if they want to contend at 35 or 45 or whatever weight class in the women's ranks they decide to fight at. But I don't know what to. I want to see both ladies do well, because I think they are some of the better women the UFC has in the roster. But both just have to step up their game, and that's what I want to see, is who actually is going to step up their game, who is actually going to go out there and try to finish a fight and not just try to outpoint the other. That's what I want to see in this fight. I want to see someone actually go for it, maybe make some mistakes, that high risk, high rewards things, and go out there and try to do something crazy, try to do a finish, and get back on the winning track. Because these ladies, they got to change something if they want to get back to the top, and they have to do it in this fight, because a loss by either, they could get cut, and I honestly wouldn't complain, and I would see it coming if they lost, and that's what they need. We need to see an apt performance by either, and if you're a fan of either of these ladies, you got to see them do something a lot better and something that gets them noticed, because right now they're not getting the job done. They're fighting to lose, or not to lose. They're not fighting to win. And they got to go out there and just, excuse me, to me, put it all on line, because I think this is a do-or-die fight for either lady. And we got to just see something. I have to see something to believe that either they're still viable towards the top and viable main event outlets, because I haven't seen it from them in their last couple fights. I haven't. With that said, let's get the picks here for UFC Singapore. First fight of the evening. Boy, this is going to be a tough matchup. Rafael Dos Anjos taking on Tarek Saffiedine. As I said, I kind of gave him a pick away, but I still think it is a tough matchup to pick, because Saffiedine is the guy that blows people away with finishes. I believe only has like 1 or 2 knockouts in his whole entire career. But I'm going to go with Tarek Saffiedine in this one. I just think that he's better suited for the weight class, and I think is going to be able to stop the takedowns of Dos Anjos and be really tricky for Dos Anjos to figure out when it does come to the feet. Dong Hyun Kim against Colby Covington. I'm going to go with Dong Hyun Kim. I like the fact that he has that little bit of unpredictability and knockout power, also fighting a little closer to home, and he's just a huge guy. I think may be hard for Covington to deal with, so I'm going to go with Dong Hyun Kim in this matchup. Andrei Arlovski against Marcin Tybura. I'm going to go with Tybura. I think Arlovski, he's pretty much done. He's lost his last 4 fights. Has not looked good in those 4 fights, and I don't think has much left in the tank, despite having a great career and being a former champion. I just don't see it anymore from the Belarusian, so I'm going to go with the man from Poland in Marcin Tybura. Holly Holm against Betch Correia. Going with Holly Holm, she's a little bigger, a little longer. I think has shown actually some finishability in her career and in the UFC, where I haven't really seen that much from Betch. Again, only 2 knockouts and 10 career victories. And also conditioning is a factor. I think Holm has shown that she can go 25 minutes, and I don't think Correia can do the same. So I'm going to go with Holly Holm here to get back on the winning track here at UFC Singapore. Once again, I am Jim Graham. Thanks to everybody for watching here on YouTube, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. To check out the show, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. To like the show on Facebook. Thanks again to my partners here, MMA Warriors here on Facebook, MMA UK, the MMA community, AJ Hiller, my good friend there, MMA Signatures, USA.com, the top site in the world for mixed martial arts memorabilia. And once again, you can follow me, Jim Graham, on Twitter at Jim Graham. So thanks, everybody. Oh, Top Rated MMA, I'd like to thank them as well. Flying Brian J., Izzy Garcia, I'm missing someone, Adam Nelson as well here on Beyond the Cage. So thanks again for everybody that supports the Cage. And once again, I am Jim Graham, and thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.